The galaxy was full of surprises, but nothing was as unexpected as the message that came to Earth one quiet evening. It wasn't from an old friend or an ally. This message was from the Galactic Federation, the largest group of intelligent species in the known universe. They were facing a problem no one could solve, and they needed help. The Federation had discovered an alien race known for its ability to create mind-bending puzzles. These aliens had built a logic trap, a puzzle so complex that it was said to be unsolvable. Every race in the galaxy had tried to crack it, but no one succeeded. The trap was not just a test of intelligence, it was a life-or-death situation. The aliens who built it had threatened to destroy a peaceful colony unless someone could pass their test. This was where the message came in. The Federation had asked for help from Earth, and they were desperate. They had tried everything, but time was running out. No one in the galaxy had been able to solve the puzzle. The Federation's greatest minds had failed. Now they were asking for someone different. The message included an invitation to Earth's government. It was a long shot, but there was one person they believed might be able to help. Not a scientist, not a brilliant mathematician, but a retired crossword puzzle champion, a woman named Violet. Violet was in her early 70s, living a peaceful life on Earth. She spent her days solving puzzles, reading books, and enjoying the simple things. She was the last person anyone would think could solve a complex alien puzzle. But she had something that the brightest minds in the Federation didn't. A mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos. When the Federation's emissaries arrived at her doorstep, Violet was not sure what to make of it. The first thing they said was, "We need your help. The galaxy needs your help." They explained the situation, telling her about the logic trap, the alien race, and the threat to the colony. At first, Violet didn't understand why they came to her. "I'm just a retired woman who loves solving crosswords," she said, feeling a little embarrassed, but the emissaries insisted. They explained that her skill in solving puzzles, even the most difficult ones, made her the perfect person for the task. "You may not have the tools or the training the others have," as one of the emissaries said, "but you have something that no one else has. Intuition. You see things that others miss. We need that." Violet thought about it for a moment. She had never been one to turn down a challenge, even one as strange as this. "All right," she said. "I'll help. But don't expect me to do anything fancy. I'll solve it the way I've always solved puzzles, with a pencil and paper." The Federation officers were unsure, but they had no other choice. They took her to their headquarters, where the logic trap was displayed on a large holographic screen. It was a confusing mess of symbols, numbers, and patterns. It looked like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The trap was designed by an alien species known as the Xanthi. The Xanthi were masters of logic and intellect, and they had created this puzzle to prove their superiority. No one had passed it, and the Federation had even tried using their advanced AI systems, but they failed. The Xanthi had made sure the trap was perfect, as unbeatable. As Violet looked at the puzzle on the screen, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had seen puzzles like this before, not in the form of holographic symbols, but in the form of crosswords and riddles. The challenge was not about understanding the complexity. It was about seeing the connections that others missed. The Federation scientists watched her carefully. They had brought in their best minds, but none of them could even begin to understand the puzzle. They were beginning to lose hope. But Violet, with her quiet confidence, sat down in front of the screen and began to work. Violet picked up her pencil and started by focusing on the edges of the puzzle. She had always believed that the key to any puzzle was to break it down into smaller pieces. As she examined the first part of the puzzle, she saw a pattern emerging. It wasn't a clear pattern, but there was something familiar about the way the symbols were arranged. The Federation scientists couldn't understand what she was doing. They'd expected her to be overwhelmed by the complexity of the trap, but Violet was calm. She didn't rush or panic. She took her time, as if she were solving a crossword puzzle from the morning paper. "What is she doing?" one of the scientists asked in disbelief. "She's just writing something down." "What is that supposed to do?" she's thinking. The emissary said, "She's not looking for a quick answer. She's using her mind the way she's always done." As the minutes passed, Violet continued to work, crossing out symbols, drawing lines, and making notes. The room fell silent as everyone watched her, unsure of what to expect. No one had ever seen someone approach a puzzle like this before. It was as if Violet had unlocked a secret code, one that no one else could even begin to understand. The Federation's best minds, who had failed again and again, now found themselves waiting for Violet to lead them to the answer. It was clear that the puzzle wasn't about complex calculations or advanced technology. It was about understanding the puzzle from the inside out, something Violet had done thousands of times in her life with much simpler puzzles. Violet's mind was sharp. It worked in ways that no one else could replicate. Advanced technology to solve this trap. She only needed patience, a pencil, and her decades of experience solving puzzles. And as she worked, the impossible began to seem possible. Violet stared at the holographic display, her eyes narrowing as she took in the complexity of the puzzle. It was overwhelming at first glance. Alien symbols filled the screen in a chaotic, seemingly random pattern. Numbers twisted and turned, overlapping in ways that made it impossible for anyone to see a clear solution. The Federation scientists were in awe of the puzzle's sheer complexity. They had spent weeks on it, using the best minds, the most advanced technology, and yet they hadn't even made a dent. But now here was Violetin, old woman with nothing more than a pencil, paper, and her years of experience solving crosswords. The scientists crowded around her, uncertain of what she would do. Some whispered to each other, skeptical. How could a simple crossword enthusiast help in such a dire situation? But Violet wasn't worried. She had faced tough puzzles before, puzzles that seemed impossible. And she knew that with time and focus, she could break through anything. Don't rush, Violet whispered to herself. Take your time. The Federation team was watching closely, waiting for any sign of progress. Violet looked at the first part of the puzzle again, her eyes tracing the symbols carefully. She didn't see them as random. To her, they were just pieces of a larger picture. The crossword wasn't just about filling in answers. It was about patterns. The real trick was seeing what wasn't obvious. She took a deep breath and began to sketch a few lines on the paper in front of her. Her hand moved with purpose, yet with a calmness that was almost unsettling. To the scientist, her slow and methodical movements seemed like a waste of time. But Violet knew better. She had seen it all before. Puzzles always hid their secrets behind layers of complexity, and she had spent a lifetime peeling back those layers. Are you sure you want to do this by hand? One of the scientists asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Violet didn't answer. She just continued her work, drawing circles around certain symbols, connecting others with lines. She circled a number here, drew a line there, and gradually, the puzzle began to make more sense. Each part she uncovered revealed a new piece of the pattern, and the pieces were falling into place. Time passed slowly. The Federation officers and scientists were still watching. But now, a hint of curiosity replaced their skepticism. The alien symbols, once a jumbled mess, were starting to look familiar. Violet's approach was working, though no one knew exactly how. You're not supposed to be able to solve this, another scientist muttered to himself. It's impossible. Violet ignored him. She focused on the puzzle, trusting her instincts. The more she worked, the clearer it became that the aliens had made a mistake. They had designed the puzzle to be complex, to confuse the mind. But Violet knew one simple truth: the more complicated a puzzle, the more it hid its simplicity. As Violet continued, the puzzle slowly began to yield its secrets. One by one, the hidden patterns emerged from the mess of symbols. It wasn't about brute force or advanced technology. It was about recognizing the simple truths hidden beneath layers of complexity. The scientists watched, mouths agape, as Violet's hand moved. With steady precision, there was a kind of magic in her calm, careful approach. She didn't let the complexity of the puzzle overwhelm her. Instead, she saw it for what it was, a puzzle like any other. The clock ticked down. The Federation team was growing increasingly anxious. They needed the solution, and they needed it soon. But Violet was unshaken. She worked at her own pace, knowing that the answer was right in front of her. One of the officers leaned over and whispered to another, "What's taking so long? We've only got a few hours left before the aliens, the other officer interrupted. She's close. I can see it. Violet didn't react to the conversation around her. She was in her own world now, surrounded by symbols and numbers that only she could make sense of. Her mind was fully engaged, and the puzzle was no longer a challenge, it was a conversation. She was speaking to it, and it was responding. Finally. After what seemed like an eternity, Violet's hand stopped. She looked up from the paper, a quiet smile spreading across her face. "I've done it," she said softly, almost to herself. The room fell silent. The scientists and officers crowded around her, eyes wide with disbelief. How could it be? How could this simple woman, a retired crossword enthusiast, solve the puzzle that had stumped the greatest minds in the galaxy? The Federation's lead. Scientists stepped forward, still in shock. "What? What did you do?" Violet pointed to the paper, where a series of numbers and symbols were now neatly arranged. "It's all about breaking things down into smaller parts." The aliens made it look like there was no pattern. But there is always a pattern. You just have to be patient enough to find it. She handed the paper to the lead scientist, who studied it in silence. Slowly, he realized that Violet had cracked it. The pattern was there, right in front of him, laid out clearly. What had seemed impossible was now solvable. It wasn't just a puzzle, it was a message, and Violet had decoded it. Scientist looked up, his face a mix of astonishment and admiration. You did it. You actually did it." Violet smiled, not out of pride, but out of relief. "Told you it wasn't so difficult." The room erupted in cheers. The Federation team, who had watched this simple woman solve a problem that had seemed unsolvable, couldn't believe their eyes. The trap had been beaten, not by advanced technology or artificial intelligence, but by a human mind that could think outside the box. For the first time in days, the Federation officers felt hope. The galaxy had been saved, not by technology, but by the most unexpected source: a retired grandmother with a love for puzzles. The Federation officers were still in disbelief. Violet had cracked the puzzle. It seemed impossible, a trap so complex that the best minds across the galaxy had failed to understand it. But Violet, with her simple method, had solved it in a matter of hours. The room was buzzing with excitement, but amid the celebration, a deeper realization began to set in. The lead scientist, Dr. Peter Caldwell, was the first to speak after the shock wore off. His voice trembled slightly as he addressed the group. "We've all seen it. She solved it. ... But how?" Violet, sitting at the table, looked at him calmly. "It's not about technology or advanced math. It's about understanding the puzzle, not just the symbols. You have to think logically, but also creatively." Dr. Caldwell nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had been one of the scientists who'd tried and failed with their most powerful computers and artificial intelligence. They'd been so focused on the complexity of the puzzle that they hadn't seen the simple truth Violet had unlocked. But, ... It's not just that. It's the way you approached it. No one thought it could be done like that. Another scientist, Dr. Thomas Hayes, spoke up, his voice still filled with disbelief. "She didn't use any special technology. She didn't even use a computer. How is it possible that she saw the answer where none of us could?" Violet looked up from her paper, a calm smile on her face. "I've spent my life solving crosswords. A puzzle is always a puzzle, whether it's on paper or on a screen. You just have to look at it the right way." The room was quiet for a moment as the team processed what she had said. They had been so focused on finding a solution through their own advanced methods that they hadn't considered the simplest approach. Violet had done what none of them could. She had found the hidden simplicity beneath the complexity, and in doing so, she had solved the puzzle. Dr. Caldwell cleared his throat. "We need to send this back to the Xanthi. They will want to know we've solved it." Violet nodded. "I'm sure they'll be surprised. But don't get too excited. This is just the first step. The real challenge is what comes next." The team exchanged confused glances. What did she mean? They had solved the puzzle, the trap had been beaten, but Violet wasn't done yet. She had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that the Xanthi had a greater challenge waiting for them as they prepared to send the solution to the Xanthi. Violet's thoughts turned inward. She hadn't just solved the puzzle for the Federation, she had done it for herself. For years, she had solved crosswords for fun. But this puzzle had been different. It had tested her abilities in a way no other puzzle had before. And while she was proud of what she had done, she knew the road ahead would be even harder. The Scifi were not just intelligent, they were calculating. They would not take kindly to being outsmarted by a simple human. The message to the Scifi was sent, and soon the reply came. The alien race's response was swift and, as expected, filled with pride and defiance. They congratulated the Federation on solving the puzzle, but there was a catch. This was just the first test. The Scifi were now challenging humanity too. A deeper trial, one that would require more than just wit and intuition. "We have passed their test," Violet said, looking at the Federation team. "But the Scifi will not be satisfied. It will want to push us further. This was only the beginning." The Federation officers were silent. They had hoped that solving the trap would be the end of it, that the Scifi would respect humanity's intelligence. But Violet's words had been a sobering reminder. The Scifi were not interested in just solving puzzles, they wanted to prove their superiority. They would not stop until they had tested humanity to its limits. Dr. Caldwell turned to Violet. "What should we do next? What's our next move?" Violet leaned back in her chair, thinking for a moment. "We need to be ready. The Scifi will not give up easily. They will create even more complex traps, and we will need to be ready to face them. But remember this, simplicity often wins. They will expect us to fight their logic with even more advanced technology. But sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. We must stay grounded." The team listened carefully, taking in her words. Violet had shown them that sometimes the greatest strength lay in simplicity and finding clarity where others saw only chaos. But would that be enough to face the challenges ahead? The Scifi were not just a race of intellectuals. They were warriors, and their pride would not allow them to back down. The next few days were filled with preparations. Violet continued to work with the Federation's scientists, teaching them her methods for approaching puzzles. She didn't just focus on the immediate challenge. She made sure they were ready for anything the Scifi might throw their way. She knew that the real battle was not just about solving one puzzle, it was about proving humanity's resilience and ingenuity. And as the days turned into weeks, Violet's reputation spread across the galaxy. The Federation, once hesitant to call on humanity for help, now understood just how valuable human creativity was. It wasn't about advanced technology or brute force. It was about thinking differently. It was about using the mind, the same way a grandmother might solve a crossword puzzle on a quiet afternoon. But Violet knew that the real test was still ahead. The Scifi had only just begun. They'd been outsmarted once, but they would not forget it. The next time, the stakes would be even higher. Violet had done what no one else could. She had cracked the impossible puzzle. But she knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. One that would test humanity's very... After the Federation's team received the reply from the Scifi, it was clear that the alien race was not pleased. They had expected their trap to remain unbeatable, but Violet's success had shattered their confidence. The Scifi's message was both a warning and a challenge. This was only the beginning. They had far more difficult puzzles to test humanity's intelligence. Violet sat in her quiet corner of the Federation headquarters, contemplating what the next steps would be. I'd cracked the first puzzle, but now the stakes were higher. The Federation officers, who had once been skeptical of her abilities, were now looking to her for guidance. They had seen firsthand how her simple, patient approach had worked, but they were unsure if it would be enough for what was coming. The Federation team gathered around Violet in a large conference room. Dr. Caldwell, who had once doubted Violet's abilities, now looked at her with a new kind of respect. "We've sent the solution to the Scifi, but they're already preparing their next test. They won't stop. How do we face them again?" Violet didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gazed out of the window, watching the stars drift by. The challenge ahead wasn't just about intelligence, it was about resilience. The Scifi were playing a game of pride. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would do everything in their power to prove that no human could outsmart them. "What we've done so far," Violet said quietly, is important, but we can't relax. The Xanthi will make sure their next test is even harder. They'll try to break our spirit. But remember this. Sometimes the best way to solve a puzzle is not to solve it all at once. We need to take it one step at a time. Dr. Caldwell nodded. You're right. But how do we prepare for something we don't even know yet? Violet smiled, her eyes glinting with quiet confidence. We prepare by being ready for anything. We stay sharp and trust in our instincts. Puzzles, no matter how complicated, always have a solution. It's just a matter of finding it. The Federation officers, still uncertain, began to feel a growing sense of hope. They had watched Violet solve the impossible, and her words made sense. They had been relying too much on technology, too focused on the complexity of the puzzles, when they should have been focused on the simplest solution. Violet had taught them that creativity, not just logic, was the key. Days passed, and then the next message came. It was from the Xanthi. The tone was cold and direct. They had been watching humanity closely, and now they were ready to present their next challenge. The Federation team, led by Violet, gathered in the conference room to decode the new puzzle. The message from the Xanthi was not like the last one. It wasn't a series of symbols or a complex maze. Instead, it was a seemingly simple question. What is the meaning of life? At first, the question seemed harmless, almost philosophical. But as the officers examined it, they realized the true depth of the challenge. The Xanthi were not asking for an answer. They were testing humanity's ability to understand the true meaning of existence. This was no longer just a puzzle, it was a question of identity, and that was something much harder to solve. The Federation team was silent. How could they answer such a profound question?
Oh, God will.
Ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated. We can't just give them an answer. This is beyond anything we've dealt with. Violet, however, remained calm. She didn't immediately try to offer a solution. Instead, she asked, "What do you think the answer is?" The room fell silent. The officers looked at each other, unsure of what to say. This wasn't something they could solve with technology or logic. This was a question that required introspection, reflection, and perhaps a bit of heart. Violet stood up. Walking slowly to the large window, she gazed out at the stars, lost in thought. "I've spent my life solving puzzles," she said, her voice soft. "But sometimes the biggest puzzle is not one that can be solved with logic alone. Sometimes the answer is about perspective, about the way we see the world and each other. The meaning of life isn't a simple answer. It's a journey, a search for purpose, and it's different for each of us." The team listened, and slowly something clicked in their minds. It wasn't about finding one right answer. It was about understanding that there was no single answer, that life and existence were complex and personal. The Federation officers were beginning to understand. They were starting to see the bigger picture. "What if we answer honestly?" Violet continued. "What if we say that the meaning of life is something we are still figuring out? That it's not about perfection, but about the journey we're on?" The room grew quiet. The officers exchanged looks, nodding slowly. It made sense. The Xanthi weren't asking for an answer that could be solved with a formula. They were testing humanity's ability to think, to reflect, to embrace uncertainty. Dr. Caldwell stepped forward, looking at Violet. "I think I understand now. It's not about the right answer. It's about the process. The willingness to think and to explore. You have to answer with truth." Violet smiled. "Exactly. Now let's send them our answer." The Federation team, now fully united, worked together to craft a message. They didn't provide a simple answer. Instead, they explained that humanity's meaning of life was an ongoing search for understanding, search that didn't need to be defined by one solution. They embraced the idea that there were many paths, many perspectives, and that the journey itself was what mattered. When the message was sent to the Xanthi, it was not a declaration of victory. It was an honest reflection of humanity's growth and realization. The Xanthi would respond in their own time. But for now, the Federation had learned an important lesson. Violet sat back in her chair, her work far from over. She had shown them how to think differently, how to approach problems with patience and perspective. But this was only the beginning. The Xanthi would return with more challenges, and humanity would need to be The days following the Federation's message to the Xanthi were filled with tension. The Federation had sent their answer, and now they waited for the aliens' response. Violet had taught them an important lesson. It wasn't always about solving the puzzle with logic or advanced technology. Sometimes it was about thinking differently, seeing the bigger picture. The Federation team had learned this lesson well. Their minds were sharper for it. But now, as they prepared for whatever challenge the Xanthi would throw their way, there was a growing sense of unease. The aliens were powerful, and their pride would not allow them to simply accept defeat. The first test had been hard enough. What would the second one bring? Violet sat quietly in the Federation's command room, looking out at the stars. She wasn't nervous. She knew that whatever came next, humanity had learned something valuable. But that didn't mean it would be easy. It was then that the message from the Xanthi arrived. The screen flashed with bright alien symbols, and the message appeared in a language no one could immediately understand. The room fell silent as everyone waited for the translation. When the translation was complete, the Federation officers were shocked. The Xanthi had sent a challenge, but it wasn't what they expected. Instead of another complex puzzle, the aliens had given them something different, a game. The message read, "We challenge you to prove your worth. We will send you a ship. You will face us in a game of strategy, a game where the stakes are your very survival. Win, and you will be free. To continue your path, lose, and you will be nothing more than a memory in the stars." The room was filled with confusion. A game? Dr. Caldwell asked, his voice filled with disbelief. What kind of game? Violet's expression remained calm. She had seen enough puzzles in her life to know that this game wasn't just about winning, it was about proving humanity's strength. The Xanthi weren't just testing their intelligence anymore. They were testing their resolve, their ability to think under pressure. "They're trying to make us overthink," Violet said softly. "They want us to be afraid, to second-guess ourselves. But we can't let fear guide us." The officers stared at her, unsure of how to proceed. The Federation's greatest minds had been pushed to their limits by the Xanthi's previous tests. But this was different. The stakes were higher, and the aliens had made it clear that there was no room for mistakes. "How do we even begin to play a game against them?" Dr. Hayes asked. "We don't even know the rules." Violet looked up at the screen again, where the alien message had just finished. "The rules will reveal themselves. They always do. We just need to stay focused." With no clear answers, the Federation team began preparing for the game. They had no idea what it would involve. They knew one thing for sure. They would have to face it together. Days later, the Xanthi's ship arrived. It was unlike anything the Federation had ever seen, a massive, sleek vessel that seemed to shimmer in the light of nearby stars. It hovered above the Federation's base, casting a long shadow over the planet below. Inside, Violet and the Federation team were briefed on the game. They would face off against the Xanthi in a battle of strategy, a war of minds. The rules were simple. Each side would take turns making moves, and the first to outwit their opponent would win. There were no weapons involved. This was a battle of intellect. And the Xanthi believed that no human could outsmart them. The game began with a holographic display showing a vast, empty space filled with floating pieces. These pieces could be moved in any direction, and each piece had different strengths and weaknesses. The goal was to capture the opponent's pieces while protecting your own. It was a game of wits, of anticipating the enemy's moves and using strategy to turn the tide in your favor. The Xanthi's representative, tall alien with bright glowing eyes, stood across from Violet. The Federation team watched nervously, unsure of what would happen next. The alien's confidence was clear. They had never lost a game like this before. They believed that their superior intelligence would guarantee victory. Violet, however, was calm. She had played games like this before. It wasn't about knowing every move in advance. It was about staying one step ahead of your opponent. She knew that she couldn't outthink the Xanthi by playing their game alone. She had to do something different. The first few moves were cautious, as both sides tested each other's defenses. But soon, Violet began to see a pattern. The Xanthi were playing with the assumption that the game was about brute force, overpowering the opponent. But Violet wasn't playing that way. She understood that sometimes the best move was to wait, to let the opponent make a mistake. As the game progressed, Violet's patience began to pay off. The Xanthi, who had started with confidence, were now showing signs of uncertainty. Violet had anticipated their moves and countered them with quiet precision. With each move, the Federation team began to see a shift. They weren't just watching. A game they were watching the Xanthi's confidence crumble. And then, with a single move, Violet made her play. She captured the alien's most powerful piece, a bold maneuver that left the Xanthi stunned. The alien's representative stared at the board in disbelief. You've won? The alien asked, its voice full of shock. Violet nodded quietly. Sometimes the best move is not the one you expect. The Xanthi representative was silent. For a long moment. Then, it looked up at Violet with something that could almost be called respect. You have proven your worth, it said, its tone no longer dismissive. Perhaps we have underestimated humanity after all, Federation. Team let out a collective sigh of relief. They had done it. They had won the game. The Xanthi, once so confident in their superiority, were now faced with the realization that humanity was not so easily defeated. Violet smiled, knowing that this victory was more than just a game. It was a lesson to the Xanthi and to everyone. Else that humanity's strength was not just in its technology or its logic, it was in its ability to think differently, to adapt, and to never. After the game with the Xanthi, there was a heavy silence across the Federation base. The victory was hard-earned, and the Federation officers could hardly believe what they had just accomplished. Violet had led them to another success, but now, as they prepared for the next move, there was a feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Xanthi, with all their pride and intelligence, would not just walk away. They would return, and this time, it would bring their greatest challenge yet. Violet sat at a table in the command center, carefully reviewing the results of the game. The Federation officers gathered around her, still in awe of the victory. But Violet was not celebrating. She had been in enough puzzles to know that the first victory often only set the stage for a harder test. They will come back stronger, Violet said quietly, without looking up from her notes. The Xanthi won't give up until they've proved their superiority. Dr. Caldwell, the lead scientist, looked concerned. Do you think they'll send another game? Another test of strategy? Violet shook her head. No, the Xanthi are proud. They'll want to do something that forces us to prove our worth even more. They won't be satisfied with a simple game of intellect. Her words hung in the air. It was clear that they had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The Federation team knew that they would need to be ready for whatever the Xanthi might throw at them next. 2 days passed before the Xanthi made contact again. The message was brief and ominous. It simply said, "You have impressed us with your wit and bravery, but we will test you once more. This time you will face the ultimate challenge. You will have no time to prepare. Your fate will be decided in a matter of minutes. Will you survive?" The message sent a chill through the Federation base. What could the Xanthi mean by the ultimate challenge? And why did they only give them minutes to prepare? Violet's expression remained calm, but the Federation officers could tell that she was deeply focused. She knew the Xanthi wouldn't make it easy. Whatever came next would be different, more dangerous, more complex. But they had no choice but to face it head-on. The Federation team gathered once again. The countdown clock had already started on the screen, ticking down from 10 minutes. The pressure was mounting, but Violet stood at the front, ready to guide them through whatever came next. Dr. Caldwell, trying to stay calm, asked, "What do we do now? How do we prepare?" Violet didn't hesitate. "We don't have time to prepare. The Xanthi are testing us on our ability to react, to stay calm under pressure. We have to think on our feet, trust in what we've learned." The countdown continued. Everyone in the room felt the weight of it. The Xanthi had thrown down the gauntlet, and they weren't going to make it easy. But Violet's steady voice brought them some comfort. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had won. "Remember," Violet said, "the Xanthi are trying to force us to panic. They want us to make mistakes. But we've been trained to think clearly, to stay focused. We can handle this." As the seconds ticked away, The Federation officers stood with a new sense of resolve. The stakes had never been higher, but Violet's calm confidence was contagious. They couldn't predict what the Xanthi had planned, but they knew one thing. For sure, they were ready to face it no matter what. When the countdown reached 0, the room went dark. The lights flickered back on, and a new message appeared on the screen. This time, it wasn't a question or a challenge, it was a simulation. The screen showed a vast space battlefield with two opposing fleets. One was the Federation's, and the other was the Xanthi's. The fleets were locked in a battle, and the Federation fleet was vastly outnumbered. The simulation displayed a clear message: survive. You have 5 minutes. The Xanthi fleet will attack in 60 seconds. Violet quickly understood. This wasn't just a puzzle, it was a real test of leadership strategy and the ability to make split-second decisions. The Federation officers had to command their fleet, make tactical choices, and avoid being destroyed by the Xanthi in the limited time they had. "This is it," Violet said, her voice firm. "We have to act fast. Key here isn't brute force, it's strategy. We need to outsmart them." The team immediately jumped into action. They began sending commands to the fleet, adjusting their positions, and preparing their defenses. The Xanthi fleet appeared on the simulation screen, massive and intimidating, but Violet guided them through every move. She directed the fleet to use hit-and-run tactics, staying on the move to avoid being surrounded. Minutes passed, and the pressure intensified. The Xanthi fleet attacked relentlessly, but the Federation fleet, under Violet's guidance, was able to dodge and counterattack. It wasn't about defeating the Xanthi's entire fleet. It was about surviving, staying alive long enough to wait for help. The Federation officers stayed focused, making quick decisions with Violet's steady leadership as the final seconds approached. The Federation fleet had taken some damage, but they were still in the game. They hadn't been destroyed, and they hadn't given up. Just as the countdown reached 0, reinforcements arrived. Turning the tide of the battle in the Federation's favor, the simulation ended, and the room went silent. The Xanthi had set the ultimate test. Could the Federation survive under pressure with no time to prepare? The Federation had passed, and they had done it without panicking, without losing focus. The message from the Xanthi appeared on the screen once again. "You have proven yourselves once more. We have underestimated you. But know this: the final challenge is yet to come." The Federation team, exhausted but relieved, looked to Violet. She had led them through the most difficult test yet. She didn't seem surprised. "We're not done yet," Violet said, standing up. "The Xanthi will never stop testing us. But now they know we can handle anything they throw at us. We just have to keep our heads and stay focused. The final challenge is coming, and we'll be ready for it." The officers nodded, their respect for Violet growing stronger with each challenge. They had faced the impossible before, but they now knew they had the strength and the will to keep fighting, no matter what the Xanthi threw at them next.